She handed me a copy of the updated will with a smile on her face. I handed her a copy of the corporate transfer deed with a bigger one. The smirk on my stepmother's face was so tight it looked painted on, but within 30 seconds, her eyes went wide, the color drained from her cheeks, and her hands started trembling so violently that the paper rattled in her grip. She thought she had just delivered the death blow to my dignity and my future, but she had actually walked directly into a legal trap that my grandfather had set for her 3 years before he passed away. Follow my story until the very end to see how the tables turned, and make sure to comment below with the city or country you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Rebecca. I am 32 years old, and for the past 8 years of my life, I have been forced to play a quiet, passive spectator to my own father's destruction. My father, Richard, wasn't always a weak man. He was once a hardworking, dedicated engineer who helped my grandfather build Sterling Manufacturing from a dusty 2-room machine shop into a multi-million-dollar industrial supplier with over 200 employees. Growing up, the factory floor was my playground. While other kids were playing in parks, I was sitting on wooden pallets, wearing oversized safety goggles, watching my grandfather inspect blueprints and teach my dad the value of absolute integrity. My grandfather, Arthur, always told me that machines don't lie. If a gear is misaligned, the whole system grinds to a halt. He taught me how to read financial balance sheets before I was 16, making sure I understood every single gear of the family business. Everything changed the year my mother passed away after a long illness. My father was broken, hollowed out by grief, and completely vulnerable. That was when Evelyn entered our lives. Evelyn was a sleek, calculating woman 8 years younger than my father, dressed in designer clothes she couldn't afford on her real estate assistant salary. Within 6 months of meeting my father at a charity function, she had moved into our family home. Within a year, they were married. From the moment Evelyn put a ring on her finger, her mission became chillingly clear. To isolate my father from everyone who truly loved him, take complete control of his wealth, and ensure that I was erased from the family legacy entirely. Evelyn's strategy was systematic and relentless. She didn't attack me openly at first. She used soft, poisonous whispers. If a batch of raw metal materials arrived late at the plant, Evelyn would casually mention over dinner how tired and distracted I seemed at my managerial post. If my father and I had a minor disagreement over vendor contracts, Evelyn would spend hours comforting my dad, convincing him that I was arrogant, ungrateful, and secretly trying to undermine his authority. Slowly but surely, my father stopped looking at me like his daughter and started looking at me like an ambitious rival. My grandfather, Arthur, saw right through Evelyn from day one. He was in his late 70s by then, retired from daily operations, but still holding the ultimate moral authority in our family. I remember one rainy afternoon, 3 years before he passed, my grandfather called me to his private study overlooking the factory grounds. He sat behind his heavy oak desk, his hands weathered by decades of hard work, and looked at me with a sad, knowing expression. He told me, "Rebecca, your father has lost his way. Grief made him blind, and Evelyn's greed will drive this company straight into the ground if we let her. She thinks she can play chess with this family, but she doesn't realize who built the board." That afternoon, my grandfather did something extraordinary. In absolute secrecy, with his lifelong personal attorney present, he executed a legal transfer of 60% of the voting shares of Sterling Manufacturing directly into my name. He put a strict non-disclosure clause in place, stipulating that the transfer would remain undisclosed on internal public registries until either my father attempted to sell the company or an external legal action tried to alter the corporate ownership structure. My grandfather wanted to give my father every chance to wake up on his own, but he made sure that the actual operational shield was placed securely in my hands. He made me promise to stay quiet, to work hard, and to let Evelyn expose her true intentions completely before I ever revealed my hand. For 3 long years, I kept that promise. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I watched Evelyn slowly fill key administrative positions at Sterling Manufacturing with her own incompetent relatives. Her younger brother, Brandon, a man who had been fired from 3 different jobs for negligence, was appointed as head of logistics. Suddenly, shipping schedules were falling apart, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in emergency freight fees were being paid out to third-party trucking companies registered under Evelyn's maiden name. When I brought the financial irregularities to my father, he slammed his fist on the desk and accused me of being jealous of Evelyn's family. Evelyn stood in the doorway of his office, dabbing non-existent tears from her eyes, playing the victim while my father apologized to her for my cruelty. When my grandfather passed away 2 years ago, Evelyn's arrogance reached an absolute peak. She believed the last barrier protecting me was gone. She began openly talking about shutting down the main manufacturing plant, laying off the veteran staff who had been there for 30 years, and liquidating the real estate to fund a lavish, early retirement in Florida. My father, completely brainwashed and suffering from early cognitive decline that Evelyn deliberately hid from the rest of the family, agreed to everything she suggested. The final betrayal happened on a Tuesday morning. I arrived at the executive suite to find my father sitting in his leather chair, looking frail and hollowed out. Beside him stood Evelyn, wearing a tailored red suit, her smile radiant with victory. Also present was Evelyn's personal attorney, a sleek corporate lawyer named Mr. Vance, whom she had hired using company funds. Before I could even sit down, Evelyn stepped forward and slid a thick manila folder across the mahogany desk toward me. "Rebecca, we're making some permanent adjustments to the family estate and the company structure," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Your father has finally realized that your presence here is a negative influence on his health and the business. He has executed a fully revised last will and testament, removing you entirely as a beneficiary. Furthermore, your employment at Sterling Manufacturing is terminated effective immediately." I picked up the document and scanned the pages. It was a cold, calculated legal execution. Evelyn had manipulated my father into leaving 100% of his estate, including his supposed controlling shares of the manufacturing plant, directly to her and her brother. I looked at my father. His eyes were downcast, staring at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "Dad," I said softly, "is this really what you want? You're letting her throw away everything Grandpa built." My father cleared his throat nervously, but before he could speak, Evelyn cut in sharply. "Don't bother guilt-tripping him, Rebecca. It's done. The ink is dry. You have 2 hours to clear your desk, or security will escort you off the premises like a common trespasser. You leave here with nothing." Evelyn leaned back against the desk, her arms crossed, practically humming with triumph. Mr. Vance adjusted his tie, looking down at me as if I were already a ghost. They thought I was going to break down. They expected tears, begging, or a dramatic screaming match that would validate the narrative Evelyn had built about me being unstable. Instead, a calm, cold certainty settled deep into my chest. The 3 years of waiting were finally over. I reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out a crisp, sealed legal document bearing an official corporate state seal, and slid it directly over the top of their updated will. She handed me a copy of the updated will with a smile on her face, I said clearly, looking Evelyn dead in the eyes. I handed her a copy of the corporate transfer deed with a bigger one. Evelyn's smile flickered. "What is this trash?" she snapped, snatching the paper off the desk. "Read paragraph 3, Evelyn," I replied, leaning back in my chair with absolute composure. 3 years ago, before my grandfather passed, he legally transferred 60% of the majority voting shares of Sterling Manufacturing directly to me. My father never owned controlling interest of this company after 2023. He held 40% non-voting equity, which means he had 0 legal authority to give away what wasn't his, and you have 0 legal standing to terminate my employment. Evelyn's lawyer, Mr. Vance, instantly reached over and grabbed the document from her hands. As his eyes scanned the official notary stamps, the legal registry numbers, and the signature of Arthur Vance, the state's most respected estate judge, the color completely drained from his face. He looked at Evelyn, then at my father, and whispered, "Evelyn, this is authentic. It's an irrevocable master deed. She owns the company." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Evelyn's face turned a horrifying shade of pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. No, this is a fake. Richard, tell her, you own this plant." she shrieked, grabbing my father's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. My father looked up, completely bewildered, staring at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. "Arthur, Dad did what?" he muttered, his voice trembling. "Grandpa knew exactly who you were, Evelyn," I said, standing up and taking command of the room. "He knew you were bleeding my father dry, and he made sure that the shield was built before you even thought to attack. And because you just attempted to execute an illegal takeover and fraudulent corporate restructuring, the automatic protective clauses of this deed are now active." I turned directly to Mr. Vance. "As majority owner and chief executive officer of Sterling Manufacturing, I am terminating your representation of this company immediately. If you do not leave this office within 5 minutes, I will file a formal complaint with the State Bar for participating in a conflict of interest fraudulent conveyance." Mr. Vance didn't even argue. He packed his briefcase, looked at Evelyn with pure disgust, and walked out of the office without saying another word. "Now, as for you, Evelyn," I continued, walking around the desk to stand directly in front of her. "Your brother Brandon's logistics department is currently under a forensic audit that I quietly initiated 2 months ago. We have already uncovered $420,000 in fraudulent invoices routed to your personal shell companies. The police and state prosecutors have already been notified, and they will be arriving at his home by noon today." Evelyn collapsed into the nearest chair, her confident posture completely shattered. The arrogant, ruthless stepmother who had spent 8 years terrorizing me was suddenly hyperventilating, clutching her throat in sheer panic. "Rebecca, please," she stammered, her voice cracking into breathless sobs. "We're family. Your father needs me. You can't do this to us." "Blood doesn't make you family, Evelyn," I said, my voice cold as ice. "Integrity does. You thought you could erase me, but you only succeeded in destroying yourself. You have 30 minutes to pack your personal belongings from this building. If you ever set foot on Sterling Manufacturing property again, you will be arrested for criminal trespass." I turned to my father. He was weeping silently, his shoulders shaking as the reality of what he had allowed Evelyn to do finally broke through his denial. He looked at me with eyes full of shame, guilt, and deep regret. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I didn't see. I was so blind." "I know you were, Dad," I said, my tone softening slightly, but remaining firm. "Grandpa saved this company from her, but you have to save yourself. Evelyn is going to face criminal charges for what she stole, and I will be taking full legal guardianship of your medical and financial affairs to make sure you are never exploited again." Within 24 hours, the toxic network Evelyn had built inside Sterling Manufacturing was completely dismantled. Her brother was arrested for grand larceny and corporate fraud, and Evelyn herself was named as a co-conspirator in a federal lawsuit that froze all of her personal bank accounts. Stripped of the wealth she had tried to steal, she was forced to move into a tiny studio apartment while awaiting trial, her reputation in the city completely ruined. Meanwhile, I took my rightful place as CEO of Sterling Manufacturing. Within 6 months, under honest management, and with the full restoration of our veteran staff, the plant achieved its highest quarterly revenue in over a decade. I brought my father to the factory floor every week, sitting him in the sunlit break room where the old workers who still remembered my grandfather would come by, shake his hand, and help him rebuild his dignity piece by piece. Standing in my grandfather's old study, looking out over the thriving factory floor, I finally felt the peace I had waited 8 years to find. My grandfather's wisdom had protected our legacy, proving that no matter how carefully a lie is constructed, truth and preparation will always win the long game. Now, I'm curious about you who are listening to my story. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have taken control of the company immediately, or would you have let your father and stepmother face the consequences alone? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to mention the city or country you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Thank you for watching until the very end.